Hey everybody, it's your host U.D.B. here, back with a new podcast for you guys. Today I'm joined by a Diamond 3 mid player named Sarcasma.
Hi, how's it going?
And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself first?
I started playing the game about 3 years ago. I didn't really do ranked all throughout season one, but I really liked it. I'd played a couple of mobile games before that, including Dota and Demigod. And when I got into LoL, it was something that I felt I could really get into. Um, but as of season three, I really been putting my head to the grindstone and trying to get some rating. And I got Diamond 3 last night, actually.
Awesome, congratulations. So you think that determination is one of the biggest key factors in getting a higher rating this season?
Yeah, I think determination is really important. I think that your mindset going into rank can totally dictate what outcome you get from it.
Alright, that's good to hear. I always tell my viewers that one of the biggest ways to get elo, and especially in this season, is just when you play more games, you tend to really increase your potential for gaining that ranking. And do you agree with that? I guess it kind of goes into the determination question as well.
Yeah, well, no, I see what you're saying. I think that's true. I think that around like season two, what happened is I achieved like gold ELO and I felt like really good about myself. But then after that, I was just too afraid to lose it. So I only played enough games though that I never really got very far. And that was something I sort of had to overcome. Uh,
And if I do remember right, you were platinum at some point in season two, and you lost it to elo decay. Is that correct?
yeah, I did. I got plat and then it decayed.
That's a shame, but anyway, so you do have a lot of that playing and climbing experience. So it's great to
hmm
have you on our podcast here. So,
Uh,
hmm?
no, go ahead. I didn't say
uh,
anything.
oh, I was just gonna say, first thing, why don't you tell us some of your favorite mid champions?
Oh, I'm kind of more of like an eclectic mid player, you know? You see a lot of people playing like Rise and Ari and that kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
Zed, and I'm more into my favorite champions are like Victor and Fizz. I know Fizz has gotten kind of popular too recently though. But I also a big fan of Zyra or Ziggs. I like anybody that can just, drop the base on the enemy, just bring the deeps in team fights.
Right, right. Do you feel like your potential to gain ranking or anything like that is gimped by your champion pool that revolves around lesser played champions or more fun champions as opposed to just the flavor of the month?
I think that playing Flavor of the Month champions does tend to limit you a little bit because the more popular a champion is, it means how more popular their counter picks are likely to be. So if you play champions that are less known, they're less likely to get countered because you just experience them less. Uh, but other times, it's just the champions are pretty versatile in general. Like Victor, I feel is a very versatile champion and can lane against almost anyone.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And he's definitely very overlooked when it comes to champions with similar properties.
Yeah, it's true. He's kind of like Annie in a lot of his abilities, except for Annie's more about bursting and getting the hell out of there. And Victor, who is a little bit, he's made to be able to stand the fight a little longer, I think.
Right. People just don't see that sustained damage coming from his ulti there. They never see it coming.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I just like to hop in. Are some of your favorite jungle mid matchups? Like, say you're playing Victor. Who are some of your favorite junglers to have on your team? Like, personally, I like playing Lee Sin and Elise because they're really great at ganking middle. But what about you? What do you like to see?
I was gonna say Elise too, man. Elise is one of the best mid gankers out there. It's just she has with her repel, she has so many angles of attack that it's like if you have a little bit of CC going on, she can usually follow up with her cocoon and you can get a kill. And then if you don't, there's just not very many places. You'd have to set up like 6 wards literally to make it so she couldn't gank you mid.
Right, right. So she is pretty expensive to ward against. Also, like Evelyn as well.
Evelyn, yeah, Evelyn's really expensive to ward against. But Evelyn also doesn't have any hard CC, and she does do, and her damage early game I feel is a little bit gimped. Her paranoia factor I think is what really carries her. Most
Right.
of the time, I'm not a huge fan of Evelyn junglers.
You know, the thing about Evelyn Jungle that's kind of funny is that she's actually very squishy, and if you turn on her in an early game gank, if it's 2v2 or the enemy jungler counter ganks or something, you can more than likely pick her up pretty easily.
She is really squishy.
Yeah. So, why don't you tell me where some of your favorite locations to ward mid are, or where you think is best to ward for most junglers?
Well, I think the best place that you can probably put it is either in the wraparound brush at the on the outside of red. You know, you put it in the connection in that little corner there, and then you can see that entire intersection coming or going, and that'll usually protect you against a lot of ganks. The other place would be like the banana brush on either side. For those of you who don't know, the banana brush is the really long brush that runs along the side of the rock on the west and east sides of mid, if you looked at the map.
Right, and on the west is going to be down a little bit more south to the southern side of the river, and on the east side it's going to be to the northern half of river.
Yeah,
Right. So that's your very favorite place to ward because it just picks up a lot of junglers trying to go for the wraparound on you or gank it from the back, which you think is the most dangerous thing that catches you off guard often.
yeah. It's just also with boards, a lot of the things that matter is also not just how things are coming at you, but as how you're at the enemy jungler or how the enemy mid is going against your allies. And so those places are also pretty good to catch like people trying to roam top or bot.
All right, I got you. I have another question actually about warding. So I hope you like the topic.
All right.
Where do you find is the most frustrating ward to keep you from roaming top or bottom or counter jungling from middle?
You know, warding in the side brushes or the best ward I think is actually if you just put it middle lane about where the two I'm gonna call them, there's like the edges of mid they almost form like a straight line
Mm-hmm.
if there was like a wall that kept going. And putting it just like right in that wall just out of turret range means that it's hard for the enemy mid to go anywhere without you knowing. Like you can see when they're going to blue, you can see when they're going to wraiths, you can see if they might be hitting top or bot if they're gone for too long.
Mm-hmm. All right, great. I'm sure that'll be very helpful to a lot of people. And when do you typically buy wards? Do you like to start off the game for a ward or on your first back usually, or just does it depend on how you're doing in the game?
It depends on how I'm doing in the game and how much what ELO I'm in. I've definitely jumped from ELO to ELO on certain people's accounts just because it gives you a pretty clear picture of how the game is played at all levels.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm going into an upper level game, I'm definitely going to have a ward in my inventory to start out with. And after a while though, you tend to watch junglers and you understand their patterns. Like usually at level 3, the enemy junglers, depending on if you're purple side, the enemy jungler is probably going to try and gank bot first, and if you're on the blue side, the enemy jungler might gank top first. But you never know. You just need to watch out for those until you can see the enemy jungler gank a lane. You just really need to be careful, and then wherever he ganks, you put the ward on that side, so that when he tries to gank you, you'll see him coming.
Gotcha. Well, I do like to do that level 3 mid gank too. They never see it coming, especially
Level
when
3
you're my
mid
mid
gank is
laner.
cool. Yeah,
All right.
this
So,
guy camps mid like a motherfucker.
it's true. I do love those free kills there with Sark. We got that synergy going on. So, anyways, as a mid laner, you really enjoy getting blue buff. Of course, the 7-10 usually is the spawn time of blue buff if you started buff at level 1. And you enjoy
Mhm.
getting that. So, when do you think it's appropriate for a jungler to not give you blue buff?
As long as you have mana, even without mana, I think that you pretty much should try to give your mid blue buff. The cooldowns really help too, especially if the enemy is getting blue. If your mid is doing poorly and you don't want to give them blue buff, I think it's pretty much just a better idea to give it anyway. At least you're giving them 70 gold on the process too.
Hmm.
Uh, the times where I wouldn't really give it is if, for one thing, like the jungler is really behind, and the mid is doing fine. I think is the most common way that you should not give your mid blue buff. Um, and the other time that you probably don't want to give a blue buff is if you're playing with somebody that has like absolutely no resources. Like say Katarina doesn't really need blue buff. Her cooldowns are nice, but if she manages her resource fine, you're not gonna really need the extra CDR.
Right, and one thing that people do seem to forget is that blue buff actually does give increased energy regeneration too. A lot of people think that it's
It does,
worthless
yeah.
on Zed and Akali middle, but it's actually really strong. Besides the cooldowns, they do get that extra energy from more harass. So it could help them maybe even as much as it would help any other mana running mid lane who likes to harass.
Kennen in particular, despite having energy, becomes really energy hungry really quickly.
Hmm.
I think Zed is a little bit better on the energy management, and so is Akali because her ult's free. Well, because the main damage comes from her ult, which is free.
Hmm. Well, speaking of Zed and Akali, these are two mids who are commonly referred to as ungankable lanes. They're extremely hard to gank, and it takes a lot of resources just to get their flash or sometimes kill them. So, do you think there's such a thing as a ungankable lane? And if
You
not,
know,
how do you
I
deal
would.
with them?
Sorry about that. I
No
would
problem.
say that the most ungankable lane is probably Fizz, because his troll pull. But everything has counters, like even Fizz's troll pull, if Maokai W's onto him, it'll still follow him, even though
Hmm.
he goes untargetable. So you just have to know what your mid lane matchups are and if your ability counters theirs or not. And certain champions as well are better at ganking ungankable lanes, like for instance Elise coming from any angle, Elise Sin, high mobility, Nocturne, his ultimate, really good at ganking these types of lanes. But I mean, it also comes down to abilities. Usually in a scuffle that you might get into mid, they're going to use their escape or their initiate ability. And so if you try and poke at them until they get into a fight with you before your jungler comes in, then they might like leap into you, which will cause your jungler to then counter gank, and you can get some. Is usually the best way to go about it. But that being said, some people just play really skittishly. And if they play really skittishly on a character like Fizz or Lissandra, it's really hard to get a gank off, and you might have to, like three-man pincher attack them.
Right, and sometimes it is best just to leave a lane alone, especially if they're playing very passively or skittishly, like you said, that they're zoning themselves from CS just by your pressure and staying back, so they don't have to waste their spells.
It's very rare that somebody is winning a lane and is ungankable, because to win a lane, you have to engage or at least try on the enemy in
Right.
some regards.
All right. Well, that's pretty good. I'm sure that'll help a lot of people out because I've been getting actually really a lot of questions about how to deal with these lanes. So, guys, you just need to wait for the cooldowns. Have your laner maybe bait them out for you if they're not too far ahead that they'd be able to kill them before you got in, or just maybe even leave them alone if they're playing that passively that they're hurting themselves. So the next question is, when do you think it's a necessity for the jungler to gank? You know, when you're losing lane, or maybe when you're winning lane, or when do you think is the optimal time to gank, and when do you think that you should be able to blame your jungler if they don't?
I mean, blaming your jungler is always a risky business, because if he wins top and bot and ignores mid, it's like, did he really do a bad job? But I wouldn't really ever try and blame your jungler for you losing a lane, or just wish ill will on that. I think that you should mostly try and promote camaraderie. But I mean, if you're doing behind, or you're getting obviously zoned and you can't seem to roam or do anything, I mean, you should ask for a gank, I think. Ganking when you're behind is just as effective as ganking when you're ahead, usually, because if you're behind, you can get caught up, and if you're ahead, they you can press the advantage. I mean, the opposite is true too. It's really hard. There's a lot of circumstances where it could differ.
Right, right. Especially if their jungler is hanging around middle or something, getting keen and countering a lot, it does make it kind of tough sometimes.
Yeah, or if like the enemy has like a Shen or a TF on their team and
Right,
you're in.
that gets pretty frustrating.
Hmm.
So we briefly touched on this earlier in the cast, but where do you is your the biggest place that you get caught off guard when you get ganked from? I remember you said that getting ganked from behind is really something that catches you off guard a lot. But is that the only spot that you have trouble with?
Yeah, usually. I mean, if they come from the side, you can usually run to the opposite side, and if they push you, you can bush juke them. Um, or you can just try and burst the enemy mid down while they're separated from the jungler. So it's not like if the jungler tries to wrap around and cut you off. So it's not usually coming from directly from the sides isn't that big of a deal. Um, Once again, certain champions have really long reach. Like for instance, Jarvan can like you know, Flagstaff and then hop onto you from like a whole screen away.
Right. Yeah, he can do that. Hmm. Well, all right, that's good to know. So hopefully, some jungles we will do take away some information that ganking from the back is really a lot better of a position you can tank than from the side bushes. Because a lot of people I see only gank from the side bushes, like they don't realize that you can go around the little mountain and get almost an assured kill usually if
Yep.
it's unwarded.
Especially if you have like really consistent CC, it's pretty good.
Mm-hmm. So as a jungler, I'm always trying to get people to group up for dragon after you win a gank bottom or steal a buff when they're low and have to back or something. So, when is the optimal time for you as a mid laner to go for an objective like Dragon or to push a tower?
Whenever is fucking possible. Like the first time you can do that, you should go for it. I mean, but what's really more important here is to learn the signs. Like if you see your mid in a completely different lane and your minion wave is pushing, or if your enemy allied team is doing dragon, uh, there's only a few circumstances where you don't really would want to do that. For like if you're mid and you guys are both full health and you don't want to go to dragon because then you're just going to drag your ally to dragon too and you might put your teammates in danger.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, usually if the mid feels like that they can do something at dragon, they're going to follow, and so you should follow them and you should keep them there too, or try and keep them busy as much as possible. But for the most part, if your team is doing dragon, you should do dragon. Unless you are pushed into the turret with like 3 people on it, you should do dragon. If other people are pushing other lanes and yours is wide open, you should push that turret. Go tier 2 if you can. Some people will just really let their turrets fall because they're trying to push other lanes. And having no tier 2 turret or tier 1 turret in mid is more damaging than usually the outer turrets because it just gives your team more map control.
That it does. I mean, I was talking about in a replay I just did, I think 2 days ago, that when you lose those tier 1 turrets, and especially the 2 turrets, the jungle just becomes it's not yours anymore. You can't walk through it without wards. You need to ward those entrances, and it costs a lot of money to upkeep those wards when your towers fall down.
Also, when you take a turret, drop a ward right behind where that turret is, because that becomes the new central location that pretty much everyone will branch out from.
Mm-hmm. Because again, they're going to want to push further if they can and get that jungle control.
Mm-hmm.
So the last question is, what do you do after a successful gank on mid lane? Say the other the other mid lane has the back or they're dead, and you're still at a pretty reasonable amount of health. What do you like to do as soon as the gank's over?
As soon as the gank's over, I mean, health is an important factor. If I have less than a bar of health, I'll usually always back, unless I can specifically see everyone on the map and they don't have any global ults, then I'll push a little bit, or completely take down a turret. If both you and the jungler survive and, their mid and jungle is gone, then you guys should just both go straight for that turret. You're more than likely to get it before anybody comes to back you up. But if you don't see anyone on that map, it's safer just to be. You don't, pushing objectives while you're too low to really push them can be a way that you throw, and it happens a lot in lower level games. Although mostly in lower level games, what happens is that people are just too afraid to push at all.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, great. So that's my last question for you tonight. Do you have anything else you'd like to say to all the junglers and mids out there?
I would just like to encourage the practice of buying 2 wards whenever you back. You can look at the gold, and going into it, you should know basically what items you're going for first. And so if you just farm a little bit after that, I mean, obviously, if you don't have enough money, maybe you could buy like not as much of an upgraded item and then buy a couple pots and wards. But just like having 2 wards in your inventory usually helps pretty good. And then the other thing I'd like to say on that is place the first ward, keep the other ward open. If you drop both wards immediately, you may have more vision of an area, but it means that if something goes down, you won't be able to get vision in an area that you need.
Right, and I just want to say, as a jungler, that you guys should also take up that practice. Buying 2 wards on every back and lighting up the opponent's jungler is really going to put you in a good position for all of your lanes and yourself, because if that 75 gold ward saves your teammate from dying top, then you just denied the opposing jungler a lot of money and a lot of experience. So anyways, thanks a ton for coming on the show, Sark, and it was a pleasure to have you, man.
Oh yeah, thanks. Anytime.
All right, and hopefully we'll have you back here in a while with some more questions.
All right, I look forward to it.
All right, have a great night, everybody.
Good night.